Did you know that some cartoons in the 1980s were so extreme that entire countries banned them? Back then, many people thought animation was only for kids. So what happens when a cartoon is too scary, too strange, or tackles forbidden topics? What could possibly be so wrong in a simple cartoon? Today, we're diving into 12 animated movies from the 1980s that pushed the limits and got punished for it. Get ready for unbelievable stories of banned films, outrage, and the cartoons that made censors panic. You'll want to watch until the end to see just how far these cartoons went. The Black Cauldron, 1985, USA. Our journey begins with a Disney film that Disney itself tried to hide. The Black Cauldron was an animated fantasy adventure from the USA. But unlike the cheerful Disney films before it, this one was dark. It was directed by Ted Berman and Richard Rich at Walt Disney Studios, and it told the story of a young pig keeper, Taran, who fights an evil horned king trying to raise an army of undead soldiers. In just a few sentences, that sounds like a thrilling fairy tale. Taran teams up with a brave princess and funny creatures to stop a cauldron that can bring skeleton warriors to life. But unlike charming tales of princesses and talking animals, this movie dives into spooky castles, deathly magic, and scenes that could give anyone nightmares. Why did this film end up nearly scaring its own creators?
For starters, The Black Cauldron was the first Disney cartoon ever to get a PG rating, meaning parents were warned it might be too intense for little kids. And it truly was. The movie had scenes of skeletons rising from the dead and a terrifying horned king villain that shocked test audiences. In fact, at early screenings, some children screamed and even ran out of the theater. Not exactly the reaction Disney hoped for. Disney's new leadership panicked. They cut out about 12 minutes of the scariest scenes before release, hoping to tone it down. But even with edits, parents complained it was way too scary and violent for a kids' movie. Critics were split. Some admired the bold visuals, but others blasted the film for being grotesque and inappropriate. One reviewer noted that all the sadism stayed put in the film, saying it was basically a violent adolescent fantasy on screen. Families expecting a lighthearted Disney romp were stunned by what they saw. The backlash was so bad that Disney buried the movie for years. It barely advertised it, and it locked the film away in the famous Disney vault, pretending it never existed. If you grew up after 1985, you might not have even heard of The Black Cauldron. Disney wanted to forget it. In the end, the movie flopped at the box office and almost killed Disney's animation studio. But over time, people rediscovered it on home video. Now, it has a bit of a cult following, especially among fans who enjoy a little light horror in their cartoons. Interesting fact, the poor reception of The Black Cauldron pushed Disney to change direction. Just a few years later, they came back with cheerier hits like The Little Mermaid. It's amazing that this one super dark cartoon forced Disney to rethink its magic formula. Who would have thought a Disney film could be so scary it was basically hidden from the world? Hey Goodlooking, 1982, USA. Our third pick is Hey Goodlooking, an American animated film by the infamous director Ralph Bakshi. Bakshi was known for making edgy grown-up cartoons, and Hey Goodlooking was supposed to continue that trend. Set in 1950s, Brooklyn, the movie follows two streetwise friends, Vinny and Crazy Shapiro, as they navigate gang rumbles, romance, and trouble with the law. The style mixes animation with some live-acty bits, and it's full of the gritty urban vibe of New York. But Hey Goodlooking had a very troubled life before audiences ever saw it. So troubled that by the time it was released, it was a shadow of what Bakshi originally made. Why the trouble? Well, Bakshi's previous film, Coonskin Had, sparked a huge controversy with its racial satire. There were protests and accusations of racism. In the fallout, the studio got cold feet about Hey Goodlooking. The movie was actually finished in 1975, with a mix of live actors and cartoons interacting. But after the Coonskin uproar, Warner Brothers decided not to release it. They worried Hey Goodlooking would also offend audiences. For 7 years, the film sat on a shelf. In that time, parts of it literally changed. By 1982, the studio demanded Bakshi remove most of the live-action scenes and turn them into animation instead. They also edited out some violent and raunchy dialogue. The version that finally hit a few theaters in 1982 was a very different version, with heavily rewritten scenes and lots of cuts. Bakshi was so unhappy with these changes that he disowned the released film. The result? Hey, Goodlooking landed almost unnoticed. It had a limited release and many people didn't even know it came out. Those who did see it found it confusing or felt it lacked the punch of Bakshi's earlier works. But it still had some controversial elements: profanity, racial tensions between Italian-American and African-American gangs, and grim violence. In some markets, it received an R rating or was quietly shuffled out of view. Behind the scenes, the controversy was really the studio's self-censorship out of fear. Warner Brothers didn't want another protest on their hands. Interestingly, in foreign countries the film did better and gained a cult following, perhaps because audiences there got the edginess Bakshi was aiming for. In the USA, though, it's a forgotten rebel of a cartoon. Fun fact, the original 1975 cut of Hey Goodlooking, with all the live action, still hasn't been released to this day, making it a lost piece of animation history. The saga of this film shows how a studio's fear of controversy can essentially censor and bury a creative work, even without an official ban. The Plague Dogs, 1982, UK. Get your tissues ready for The Plague Dogs, a British animated film that is both heart-wrenching and horrifying. Made by director Martin Rosen, this film is based on Richard Adams's novel and follows 2 dogs, Raouf and Snitter, who escape from a research laboratory in England. These poor dogs have been experimented on. One was nearly drowned repeatedly, the other had brain surgery. Once they break free, they roam the grim countryside trying to survive, all while authorities hunt them down. It's a serious adventure drama that does not hold back on showing the cruelty the animals face. Think Watership Down was intense with fighting rabbits. The Plague Dogs ups the ante with realistic, sad, and violent scenes that left audiences shaken. Why did this film get censored and cause an outcry? Because it absolutely did not feel like a cartoon. It felt real and devastating. The animation might be of animals, but the themes are very mature: animal cruelty, death, and despair. When it was first released in the UK, it already had a dark reputation. In the United States, the distributor was so nervous that they cut out an entire scene from the film for being too shocking. In that notorious scene, the dogs, starving, come across the body of a man, and, in the original cut, you're led to believe they ate the corpse to survive. This gruesome implication was removed in the US version to avoid completely horrifying the audience. Even with cuts, the movie was later rated PG-13, specifically for animal cruelty, violent imagery, and emotionally distressing scenes. In other words, the censors had to warn people, this is not a cute animal cartoon. It's an upsetting experience. Many viewers were outraged. They left theaters in tears or even anger, saying the film was too depressing and brutal to be shown. Unlike Disney films where animals talk and sing, in The Plague Dogs, the animals bleed, starve, and cry in pain. The public and critics were divided. Some praised the film's courage in exposing animal experimentation, but many found it disturbing and questioned whether such a film should be shown widely. Perhaps because of that, the movie got only a limited release. It struggled to find distributors precisely due to its reputation for making people miserable. It didn't make much money, but over time, it gained respect among animation fans as a cult classic that doesn't sugarcoat its message. Interesting fact: for decades it was hard to find the uncut UK version. Only in recent years did it come out on Blu-ray, so people could see those deleted scenes restored. If you do watch it, prepare yourself. The Plague Dogs is so emotionally heavy that it makes Watership Down look like a picnic.
It's a powerful film, but one that definitely pushed 1980s censorship folks to their limit. When the Wind Blows, 1986, UK. The mid-80s gave us a British animated film that proved cartoons can tackle the end of the world itself. When the Wind Blows is a UK film directed by Jimmy T. Murakami, based on Raymond Briggs's graphic novel. On the surface, it has simple, even cute animation of an elderly English couple, Jim and Hilda, living in the countryside. But the story? It's about them trying to survive after a nuclear bomb strikes Britain. The couple, drawn in a cozy style, bumble through government survival pamphlets and build a shelter in their home, all the while not fully grasping the horror that's unfolding. As the fallout settles, they get sick from radiation. There are no happy songs, no friendly animals, just two sweet, ordinary people facing an absolutely devastating reality. This film was controversial and shocking because it delivered an anti-war gut punch in a medium everyone associated with kids. The UK was in the Cold War era, and fear of nuclear war was real. To see it presented through an animated format made the impact even more surprising. People didn't expect to cry or feel dread from a cartoon, but When the Wind Blows made many viewers do exactly that. Why was it restricted or debated? For one, it was extremely depressing and intense. By the end, the elderly couple are slowly dying, still hopeful in a heartbreaking way. Some critics felt the film was too heavy-handed, almost unbearable in its sad, slow march to tragedy. Others, however, praised it as powerful, shocking. It gets to you, as it ought to. That's an actual quote from a review. The story was called Ludicrous and Shocking. Ludicrous not meaning funny, but rather pointing out the couple's innocent faith in government instructions, even as things fall apart. It was a way to criticize how unprepared society might be for nuclear war. And it didn't spare our feelings. Because of its content, When the Wind Blows was clearly marketed to adults. It avoided bans, but it had a tough time finding a large audience in theaters. Not many people line up to watch an animated apocalypse that leaves them devastated. In terms of censorship, the UK had already banned a live-action nuclear war film, Threads, from TV for being too horrifying. When the Wind Blows being animated possibly shielded it from that fate, but it was still given a serious age rating. Some parents who stumbled upon it were horrified that it was even animated at all, as if the format somehow made the grim story more disturbing. Over time, however, this film has been recognized as an animation masterpiece. It's often mentioned alongside Grave of the Fireflies as one of the saddest animated films ever made. It even had a unique soundtrack scored by Pink Floyd's Roger Waters, underscoring the bleak mood. Interesting fact, the film's style mixes drawn animation for the characters with real photographic backgrounds of their cottage, making it feel even more realistic. In the end, When the Wind Blows proved cartoons can deliver a powerful anti-war message, but audiences needed to be prepared for just how much a cartoon could emotionally wreck them. Who knew simplicity could be so harrowing? Barefoot Jen, 1983, Japan. From Japan comes Barefoot Jen, one of the most controversial animated films to ever depict war. This movie, directed by Mori Masaki and produced by the famous Madhouse Studio, is an animated war drama about the bombing of Hiroshima, seen through the eyes of a young boy. It's based on a manga by Keiji Nakazawa, who actually lived through the Hiroshima bombing as a child. The story follows Jen, a cheerful little boy, and his family in 1945. We spend a half hour getting to know them, his pregnant mom, his dad who's against the war, and then it happens. The atomic bomb is dropped on their city. What follows are some of the most graphic and heartbreaking scenes ever put in animation. People's skin burns and peels. Buildings turn to rubble. Jen witnesses his father and siblings trapped and dying in a fire. It's all drawn in unflinching detail. Victims with flesh melting off, desperate cries for help. If this sounds incredibly grim, it is. And it was meant to be. as an anti-war statement from someone who experienced the real thing. When Barefoot Jen was released, it stunned viewers in Japan and abroad. Why was it controversial? For one, the graphic violence and imagery of suffering were far beyond what anyone expected from an animated film in 1983. At that time, even many live-action films didn't show such realistic horror of nuclear war. Parents in Japan who thought they might educate their kids about history with this film had to reconsider. Some scenes are so intense that even adults look away. In the US, the film was eventually released in a subtitled format, but always with a warning. This is not for young children. Beyond the gore, Barefoot Jen also tackled politically sensitive topics. It criticized military leaders and even the Japanese emperor's role in the war, pointing out the nationalistic fervor and the suffering it brought. This did not sit well with everyone in Japan. In fact, decades later, in 2013, a school board in a Japanese city actually removed the Barefoot Jen manga from school libraries because some felt it was too graphic and too anti-Japanese in depicting war crimes. There was a huge uproar about this censorship, and many fought to get it back on shelves, which shows how powerful and divisive Jen's story remains. Public and government reactions have varied. Barefoot Jen has been praised internationally as an important anti-war film. Critics note its raw, honest portrayal of Hiroshima's aftermath is unforgettable. But in Japan, while widely respected, it has also faced periods of suppression by those who found its bluntness uncomfortable or unpatriotic. It was never banned by censors for theater release, but it carried an implicit, for mature audiences label. Interestingly, the film's graphic content has been used in classrooms in some countries to show the human cost of nuclear war. What happened later? The film got a sequel in 1986, continuing Jen's story in the ruined city. Over time, Barefoot Jen became a cult classic among anime enthusiasts and peace activists. It's often compared to Studio Ghibli's Grave of the Fireflies, another animated film about wartime children, and considered even more directly horrifying. Fun fact, the creator Nakazawa said he drew Jen's story because he didn't want people to forget what happened in Hiroshima. The film's most infamous scene, the bomb flash, where in a split second we see people's flesh char and children evaporate, is something you simply cannot unsee. It's 100% 13+ content, showing that sometimes animation isn't just kid stuff. It can be history's darkest lessons drawn on the screen. Grave of the Fireflies, 1988, Japan. A beautifully devastating masterpiece. Often mentioned in the same breath as Barefoot Jen, Japan's Grave of the Fireflies is another animated film that left audiences in tears, though its controversy was more about emotional impact than censorship. Directed by Isao Takahata of Studio Ghibli, this film tells the story of Seita, a teenage boy, and his little sister Setsuko, trying to survive in Japan during the final months of World War II. After their city is firebombed, they become orphans and struggle with starvation and illness. Unlike Barefoot Jen, Grave of the Fireflies isn't graphic in showing gore. Its power comes from the deep sadness of two innocent kids slowly succumbing to war's effects. It's animated with great beauty and detail, making the tragedy hit even harder. So why is Grave of the Fireflies on this list of controversial animations? Because it shattered the notion of animation being light entertainment. When it was released, it was actually shown in Japanese theaters as a double feature with the much more cheerful My Neighbor Totoro. This pairing was supposed to attract families, but imagine going in expecting a fun time, and then Grave of the Fireflies starts and delivers one of the most heartbreaking stories ever told. many parents and children were completely unprepared. Viewers left the cinema sobbing. The stark, tragic nature of Fireflies actually turned away many audiences during that double-feature run. People literally walked out because it was too emotionally draining to watch after a happy movie. While it wasn't banned, the controversy here was more about public outcry that such a devastating story was presented as an animated film. Some felt it was almost cruel. Like, why make us watch two kids slowly die in an art form typically used for joy? Critics, however, universally praised Grave of the Fireflies. It's now considered a masterpiece. Roger Ebert, a famous film critic, said it was one of the most powerful war films ever made. But back in the late 80s, you can bet it shocked viewers. In Japan, it did modestly at the box office. Internationally, it took time for people to discover it on home video. Some countries gave it an age rating to ensure kids wouldn't stumble upon it unwittingly. Interestingly, decades later in 2021, Grave of the Fireflies was reportedly banned in Russia along with some other anime, under claims that these films could be harmful to children's mental health. Russian courts felt its depiction of suffering might harm the spiritual and moral development of minors. This shows that even as an animated anti-war film, some authorities see its content as too disturbing for youth. Over time, Grave of the Fireflies has become essential viewing for fans of serious cinema, albeit one-time viewing because it's so emotionally heavy that few can bear to watch it twice. It wasn't a case of gore or indecency causing controversy. It was the sheer emotional weight and realism of the tragedy that caught people off guard. Interesting fact, there's often a debate, is Grave of the Fireflies an anti-war film or just a human drama? Takahata, the director, said he intended it more as a story about the consequences of pride and isolation, not just a straightforward anti-war propaganda. Regardless, it's hard not to come away from it with a strong anti-war feeling. One thing's for sure, Grave of the Fireflies proved that an animated movie could be as serious and grown-up as any live-action film, leaving a deep scar on the hearts of its audience. Keep the tissues handy for this one, and maybe some cheerful cartoons on standby to recover afterward. Akira, 1988, Japan. If one animated film can be credited with blowing Western audiences' minds about what Japanese anime could be, it's Akira. Created by Katsuhiro Otomo, Akira is a cyberpunk sci-fi thriller set in Neo-Tokyo, a futuristic city rebuilt after a mysterious explosion. The story follows Kaneda, a biker gang leader, and Tetsuo, his friend who suddenly develops dangerous psychic powers after a government experiment. The film features high-speed bike chases, political intrigue, and mutant powers causing mass destruction. But what really got people's attention was the level of graphic violence and intense imagery. We're talking bloody injuries, monstrous mutations, and chaos in a detail never seen before in animation at that time. Arms get blown off. Tetsuo morphs into a terrifying giant flesh creature. It's nightmare fuel, but incredibly well animated. When Akira came out, it caused a sensation and some panic. In Japan, it was a hit and firmly rated for teens and adults. But when it started spreading internationally, especially to the USA and Europe in the early 90s, it was many people's first exposure to an adult anime film. Censors in different countries reacted differently. The film wasn't outright banned in most Western countries, but it definitely got slapped with restrictive ratings to keep kids out. The UK, during the late 80s and early 90s, was notorious for cutting violent movies. However, Akira mostly survived uncut in the UK, possibly because anime was new and flew under the radar a bit. That said, when it aired on TV or places like the Cartoon Network's Toonami block years later, it was censored for language, and some gore. The most striking example of censorship related to Akira happened much later in Russia. In 2021, a Russian court banned Akira outright from certain websites, claiming it could influence children negatively. They argued that Akira's scenes of violence and psychic terror might encourage violent behavior or be too traumatic for youth. Essentially, even decades after its release, Akira was seen as so intense that a government felt it was dangerous for kids to even stumble upon. Public reaction back in the late 80s was a mix of awe and shock. Fans of science fiction and animation were amazed. They had never seen such detailed animation and complex storytelling in a cartoon. But some parents and critics were horrified by the extreme violence and disturbing themes. There were reports of people walking out of theaters during the more gruesome scenes. In some countries with stricter censorship, Akira may have had limited screenings or required heavy cuts. For instance, any sexual content or the goriest moments might have been trimmed in more conservative markets. Yet, Akira largely became a cult phenomenon that escaped the bannings that hit other anime on this list. Its legacy is huge. It opened the doors for more adult anime globally. Interesting fact: the animators of Akira used an unusually high number of animation frames, and they even recorded the voice actors before animating to get very natural lip movements. This obsession with quality made it a landmark film. In the end, Akira is remembered not for being banned, but for showing the world that animation can be explosively violent art. Still, in 1988, it absolutely earned its place in the not-for-kids category. Censors and parents everywhere made sure of that. Urotsuki Doji, Legend of the Overfiend, 1989 Japan. Now brace yourselves for perhaps the most shockingly adult animation of the 1980s. Urotsuki Doji, Legend of the Overfiend. If you've never heard of it, well, that might be because this Japanese anime was banned or heavily cut in many countries for its content. Urotsuki Doji essentially created a whole infamous genre of anime. It mixes horror, fantasy, and extremely explicit sexual content in an over-the-top story. The plot, if one can call it that, involves three realms: human, demon, and beast, and a prophecy about a superdemon who will unite or destroy them. In practice, the film features demons attacking humans in the most graphic ways imaginable. There are scenes of monsters assaulting women, extreme gore, and things that cross far beyond normal R-rated territory. It's animated in detail, which for many made it even more disturbing than live action. These animators' imagines went truly wild, and not in a good way for censors. The controversy around Urotsuki Doji was immediate and global. Why was it banned? Because in the late 80s, nothing like this had been seen. It was essentially animated pornography mixed with violent horror. The UK's censors, the British Board of Film Classification, absolutely refused it. The later sequels were banned outright in Britain. Even the first film, when it was eventually released in the UK, was cut to ribbons. Many other countries in Europe either banned it or only allowed severely edited versions. Australia and New Zealand banned or censored it. In the US, it was never going to play in theaters, but an uncensored NC-17 or unrated tape circulated in specialty shops. Basically, it was treated like contraband in several places because of the sexual violence. One part of the series, Urotsuki Doji 4, was noted as being little more than animated child porn, and thus banned in the UK. It's as extreme as it sounds. Critics and authorities did not even debate much. They saw this anime as beyond the pale. A reviewer in Variety famously said, "Urotsuki Doji is a sci-fi horror schlock extravaganza verging on porno." Films like this are why the word misogynist was invented. In other words, They felt it utterly hated women based on how it depicted them. That's a harsh critique, but looking at the content, you can understand the disgust. Public reaction for those who stumbled upon it was usually shock and revulsion. Yet, Legend of the Overfiend also gained a cult status among certain adult anime fans for being so infamous. Some people rented it just to see if it was as crazy as they heard, and many regretted it. It introduced Western anime fans to the concept of tentacle erotica, which is a bizarre subgenre that bypassed Japanese censorship laws regarding human depiction by using monsters. The reaction in Japan was actually more accepting in the niche adult market. It spawned multiple sequels there. But overseas, this film practically defined anime's bad reputation in the early days. If a politician or parent wanted to decry nasty Japanese cartoons, Urotsuki Doji was Exhibit A. Interesting fact, despite all this, the creator Toshio Maeda has attended international conventions and discussed the work openly, somewhat amused that something he made became so notorious. He even said the extreme content was partly to make a social satire. In any case, Urotsuki Doji stands as the example of a 1980s animated movie that pushed completely past acceptable limits. It shows that animation can go places so dark that virtually every censor board in the world said, absolutely not. And indeed, for good measure, keep far, far away from this one unless you're very sure you want to see the worst. Wicked City, 1987 Japan. Continuing with adult anime, let's talk about Wicked City, a Japanese animated film that dared to mix film noir style with grotesque horror. Directed by Yoshiaki Kawajiri, Wicked City is set in a world where humans coexist with the black world of demons, albeit secretly. A special police force works to maintain peace between the two. The story follows a human agent, Taki, and a demon partner, Maki, as they protect a diplomat. But honestly, the plot often takes a back seat to the shocking scenes that unfold. Picture a beautiful woman turning into a giant spider creature during an intimate moment, trapping a man in her web, or slimy monsters attacking and some very adult encounters where demons attempt assault. Wicked City has explicit violence and sexual content that firmly put it in the adults-only category. Why did this film face censorship? Simply put, Wicked City included scenes of sexual violence and creepy horror that many found too extreme. In Japan, it was released for the adult market, but when exporting it, they knew some content would be problematic. Indeed, the uncensored version of Wicked City was banned or heavily cut in several countries. The United States, for example, initially got edited versions. The UK release in the 90s was cut by the BBFC to remove or soften the most graphic bits. According to one source, the dark portrayal of sexual abuse and violence in Wicked City led to the ban of the uncensored version in the US, meaning only a toned-down cut was allowed for distribution. The edited version removes a few of the most graphic seconds. In Italy and other places, similar cuts happened. This was an era where any hint of animated sexual violence would raise alarms, and Wicked City did not hint. It showed it outright. The public reaction was interesting. Anime fans, who were growing accustomed to edgier content, largely praised the film's stylish animation and unique horror vibe. It's often described as Men in Black meets a nightmare for its buddy cop versus monsters feel. But mainstream audiences and critics were more wary. Some enjoyed the thriller aspects,
but others were repulsed by the erotically charged horror. One notable thing, Wicked City helped spur the conversation in the West that anime is not just for children. When folks saw it, they knew cartoons weren't in Kansas anymore. TV broadcasts absolutely could not show it uncut. When Wicked City aired on late-night cable or specialty anime blocks, it was heavily censored or accompanied by lots of viewer discretion warnings. In certain Asian countries with strict content rules, the film was outright banned due to its sexual content with monsters. Yet, Wicked City has become a cult classic in its genre. It's known for its slick art, jazz music, and shocking scenes that you can't forget. Fun fact, there was even a live-action adaptation of Wicked City made in Hong Kong in 1992. It toned down some of the sexual horror, but was still pretty wild, and, as expected, got mixed reviews. Overall, Wicked City demonstrated the international tug-of-war with anime censorship. Japanese studios pushed artistic freedom to adult themes, and other countries' censors pulled back hard to protect audiences. If you venture into this city, be warned. It's a wicked one indeed, and the censor's scissors were very busy trying to tame it. The Big Bang, 1987, France, Belgium. Animation controversies weren't just in Japan or the English-speaking world. In Europe, one name stands out, Picha, a Belgian cartoonist known for raunchy animated comedies. His film, The Big Bang, original French title Le Big Bang, is a perfect example of a European adult animation that ran into censorship trouble. The film is an original story set after World War III, where Earth is mostly destroyed. In this darkly comedic dystopia, Russia and the USA have merged into a superstate, and they find one surviving country, an island of only women called Virginia. God up in heaven sees war brewing again and sends an angel to try to stop it. As you might guess, the movie is filled with political satire, sexual jokes, and blasphemous gags. For instance, God is depicted as a cranky old man who at one point gets intimate with his wife on a cloud. Soldiers are portrayed as sex-crazed buffoons. It's very much not for kids. So, what happened when The Big Bang reached audiences? The British censors had a fit. When the English-dubbed version came to the UK, the BBFC demanded cuts. Specifically, they cut scenes where God swears and has sex with his wife on a cloud. Blasphemy was still taken pretty seriously in 1980s Britain. A depiction of God using profanity and in a sexual situation was a big no-no for the censor at that time. The fact the film was a comedy didn't excuse it in their eyes, so those scenes were edited out to avoid offending religious sensibilities. Apart from that, some of the sexual humor might have been trimmed or given a higher rating. The film wasn't banned in the UK outright, but these censor cuts show that it crossed the line. In other conservative countries, there's a chance The Big Bang wasn't released at all, or only in art house circuits because it's quite irreverent. Ironically, by today's standards, the film's animation style is cartoonish and not realistic, so the audacity is more in the ideas and dialogue than any graphic visuals. The public reaction otherwise was muted because The Big Bang wasn't a huge mainstream release. It had a limited audience who appreciated Picha's previous films like Tarzoon, Shame of the Jungle, and The Missing Link. Fans of adult animation enjoyed the outrageous, absurd comedy. But at the box office, The Big Bang fizzled. It didn't make much money. That might be due to its niche appeal and maybe the controversy limiting its reach. It wound up being Picha's last big animated feature for about 20 years. Interesting tidbit. Picha often adapted his films into comic books. For The Big Bang, a comic version was published, which presumably includes all the uncut content in static form. Also, the film features a plotline about a war between sexes and countries that might remind one of the absurd satire in Dr. Strangelove, but dialed up with dirty jokes. In any case, The Big Bang shows that even in the world of cartoon comedy, religion and sex can trigger the scissors of censorship. The British censors effectively said, "Cut the cloud scene, or this film won't see the light of day." And so, it was cut. If you ever find an uncut version, you'll see what the fuss was about. And you might even chuckle at how brazen the jokes are. Just don't expect a Disney fairy tale. This one is more about ruffling feathers.